Whispers in the cornfield. I moved to Willowbrook with my family a few years ago, hoping to find peace and tranquility in the quaint little town. It was everything we had dreamed of, a picturesque place nestled between rolling hills with cobblestone streets and charming cottages. The townsfolk were friendly and the atmosphere was calm and peaceful. However, as the leaves started to turn crimson and the chill of autumn descended upon Willowbrook, I began to sense that something was amiss. The first sign that things weren't quite right came in the form of hushed whispers from the locals. They spoke of an old legend that had been passed down through generations. The legend of the haunted scarecrow that stood at the edge of town. No one seemed eager to share the details, but their wary glances and nervous laughter were enough to send shivers down my spine. One chilly October evening, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to investigate the legend of the scarecrow for myself. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of trepidation, I made my way to the outskirts of town. The moon was hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, casting eerie shadows along the deserted path that led to the scarecrow. As I approached the field where the scarecrow stood, the wind picked up, rustling the cornstalks and creating an unsettling, whispering sound. The scarecrow loomed in the distance, its tattered clothes flapping in the breeze. Its face, carved from a withered pumpkin, wore a perpetual grimace that seemed to mock anyone who dared to get too close. Drawing closer, I noticed something strange about the scarecrow's eyes. They glowed with an otherworldly bluish light that seemed to pierce through the darkness. The light flickered and danced, casting eerie shadows across the field. It was then that I realized this scarecrow was unlike any I had ever seen. A sudden gust of wind sent a shiver down my spine, and I could have sworn I heard a whisper in the breeze, faint but distinct. It sounded like a name that sent a chill through my bones. Ichabod Crane. The name was familiar, a character from a classic story, but I couldn't understand why it was connected to this cursed scarecrow. I couldn't tear my gaze away from the scarecrow, its presence becoming increasingly unsettling. I took a cautious step closer, my heart pounding in my chest. With each step, the whispers in the wind grew louder, more insistent. I strained to make out the words, and slowly they began to form a chilling tale. It spoke of Ichabod Crane, a schoolteacher who had once lived in Willowbrook many years ago. He was a lanky, superstitious man who often entertained the townsfolk with his ghost stories and tales of the supernatural. One fateful autumn night, Ichabod had ventured out into the woods, drawn by rumors of a headless horseman who roamed the area. As the tale unfolded, I could see it vividly in my mind's eye. Ichabod's horse racing through the darkened forest, the thundering hoofbeats echoing in the night. The headless horseman, a terrifying figure with a pumpkin for a head, pursued Ichabod relentlessly, wielding a gleaming axe. I shuddered as the story continued, recounting how Ichabod had been chased all the way to the very spot where the scarecrow now stood. In a desperate bid to escape, he had reached out to grab the scarecrow's pumpkin head, hoping to use it as a weapon. But as he touched it, the scarecrow came to life with a malevolent force, its pumpkin head twisting to face Ichabod. The wind howled, and with a wicked cackle, the scarecrow had torn Ichabod's own head from his shoulders. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the horrifying truth. The scarecrow before me was the very same one from the legend, and it was cursed by the spirit of the headless horseman. I stumbled back, my heart racing, unable to tear my eyes away from the spectral figure. As I retreated, the whispers grew louder, the voices of the townsfolk joining the eerie chorus. They spoke of how the scarecrow had come to life every Halloween night, seeking to claim the heads of those who dared to venture too close. I knew then that I had to get away, but the scarecrow's glowing eyes seemed to follow me, its silent menace hanging in the air. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing through the empty fields, the whispers of the legend still haunting me. It felt as though the scarecrow's malevolent presence was right behind me, its cold breath on my neck. I stumbled and fell, my flashlight rolling away from me, leaving me in darkness. Just as I thought I was lost, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, a hollow laughter echoing through the night. I knew that laugh. It was the laugh of the headless horseman. Panic seized me, and I scrambled to my feet, frantically searching for my flashlight. With trembling hands, I finally found it and shone the beam in the direction of the scarecrow. To my horror, the scarecrow was no longer where it had been. Instead, it stood just a few feet away, its glowing eyes fixed on me, its pumpkin head twisted in a sinister grin. I turned and ran faster than I ever had in my life, the laughter of the headless horseman echoing in my ears. I could hear the scarecrow's footsteps behind me, its presence closing in. I didn't dare look back, for fear of what I might see. Finally, I burst through the cornfield and into the safety of the town's streets. I didn't stop running until I reached my home, my heart pounding, and my breath coming in ragged gasps. I locked the doors and windows, praying that I had escaped the curse of the scarecrow. As the first light of dawn broke, I ventured back to the outskirts of town. The scarecrow was once again in its rightful place, as if it had never moved. But I knew the truth. It had come to life, and the legend of Willowbrook was far more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. From that day on, I never ventured near the scarecrow again, and I warned anyone who would listen about the cursed creature that lurked in the fields. Willowbrook may have seemed like a peaceful town, but beneath its serene exterior lay a darkness that could send even the bravest souls running in fear. And so, each Halloween night, as the moon shone down on Willowbrook, I would stay locked in my home, listening to the howling wind and the distant laughter of the headless horseman, knowing that the haunted scarecrow still roamed the fields, waiting to claim its next victim. The legend of Willowbrook had become all too real for me, a terrifying nightmare that I could never escape.
The Witches of Hollow's Revenge. I never thought much of Hollow's Rest, the sleepy town I'd called home for as long as I could remember. Nestled deep within the forested heart of the Appalachian Mountains, it seemed like a place untouched by time, a forgotten pocket in the world. It was a place where everyone knew everyone else's name, where the pace of life was slow, and the stories were as old as the hills themselves. That was until the autumn of my 18th year when the whispers began. It started as a subtle undercurrent in the town's quiet conversations, an eerie rustling in the wind that sent shivers down my spine. People began to speak of strange happenings, of sightings in the woods, and of curses whispered among the trees. One evening, as I was walking through the dimly lit streets, I caught wind of a hushed conversation between two elderly women sitting on a porch. Their eyes darted furtively as they spoke, and their voices barely carried to my ears. "They're back!" one of them hissed, her voice quivering with fear. "The witches?" the other whispered in reply, her tone full of dread. I pretended not to hear, but my curiosity was piqued. Witches? In Hollow's Rest? It sounded like something out of a fairy tale, but the fear in their voices was real. The next day, I sought answers. I began with the town's oldest resident, Old Man Henderson, a reclusive hermit who lived on the outskirts of town in a ramshackle cabin. He was rumored to know the town's deepest secrets. I found him sitting on his porch, whittling a piece of wood. His gnarled hands moved with practiced ease, and his eyes, a pale blue like the autumn sky, bore into my soul as I approached. "Old Man Henderson," I began tentatively, "I heard talk of witches in Hollow's Rest. What can you tell me about them?" The old man's lips curled into a knowing smile, revealing a set of yellowed teeth. "Aye, lass," he said in a gravelly voice, "there be witches here, but they ain't like the ones in your stories. These are old, ancient witches, bound to this land and its secrets." He beckoned me to sit, and I did, eager to hear more. Old Man Henderson spoke of a dark history, one that had been passed down through generations. He told me of a coven of witches who had once lived in Hollow's Rest, women with powers beyond mortal comprehension. They were said to have made a pact with the forest itself, becoming one with the ancient trees and the whispering winds. But their power came at a price. The witches demanded sacrifices, animals, and sometimes even people, to maintain their connection with the land. And when the townsfolk had had enough of their cruelty, they had banished the witches, cursing them to never return. For centuries, the witches had remained in exile, their names forgotten, their story buried in the town's darkest secrets. But now the whispers said they were back, seeking revenge on the descendants of those who had banished them. Old Man Henderson's tale sent chills down my spine, and a sense of unease settled in my chest. I couldn't help but wonder why the witches had returned after all these years and what they wanted from us. As days turned to weeks, the town's unease grew. People reported strange happenings in the woods, mysterious lights, eerie chants in the night, and shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. Some claimed to have seen the witches themselves, cloaked in darkness and surrounded by an otherworldly aura. I couldn't deny the mounting evidence, and my own encounters with the supernatural were becoming harder to ignore. One night, as I was walking home from a friend's house, I heard the haunting melody of a flute, its notes winding through the trees like a siren's song. The tune was beautiful and alluring, but it filled me with a sense of dread. I followed the sound deeper into the woods, unable to resist its pull. There, in a small clearing, I saw them. 3 figures cloaked in dark robes, their faces hidden beneath hoods. They danced in a circle, their movements graceful and hypnotic. The melody of the flute grew louder, and I realized it was coming from one of the witches. I watched in stunned silence as they performed their ritual, a chilling sense of foreboding washing over me. It was then that one of the witches turned her head, her hood falling back to reveal a face as ancient as the hills themselves. Her eyes met mine, and I felt a jolt of recognition, an ancestral connection that sent shivers down my spine. I fled the scene, my heart pounding and my mind racing. What did the witches want from me? What did they want from the town? The answers came one fateful night, when I awoke to find my room bathed in an eerie green light. I sat up, my heart racing, and saw the 3 witches standing at the foot of my bed. Their eyes bore into mine, and I could feel their power, a force as ancient and untamed as the forest itself. "We have returned," the eldest witch hissed, her voice like the whisper of leaves in the wind. "The blood of those who banished us flows in your veins. You are our vessel, our conduit to this world." I tried to speak, to protest, but I was paralyzed, unable to move or utter a word. "We seek revenge," another witch intoned, her voice like the crackling of a dying fire. "For centuries we have waited, biding our time, and now the reckoning has come." With a wave of their hands, the witches summoned a swirling vortex of green light, and I felt myself being lifted from my bed, drawn into its mesmerizing depths. The world around me twisted and contorted, and I was plunged into a dark, swirling void. I awoke in a place that was neither here nor there, a realm of shadows and ancient magic. The witches stood before me, their power radiating from them like a palpable force. "You will be our instrument of vengeance," the youngest witch declared, her voice like the rush of a river. "You will bring chaos and despair to this town, just as our ancestors did to us." I tried to resist, to fight against the dark forces that held me captive, but it was futile. The witches' power was too great, and I was helpless in their grasp. For days, I carried out their bidding, casting spells that brought fear and confusion to the townsfolk of Hollow's Rest. I watched as friendships crumbled, families fell apart, and the once peaceful town descended into chaos. But deep within me, a spark of resistance still burned. I couldn't bear to see the town I loved torn apart by the witches' vengeance. With every ounce of strength I could muster, I fought against their control, pushing back the darkness that threatened to consume me. One night, as I stood on the edge of a precipice, ready to cast a spell that would send the town into even greater turmoil, I hesitated. Memories of my childhood, of the town's simple beauty and the kindness of its people, flooded my mind. With a surge of determination, I turned away from the precipice and faced the witches. "No," I said, my voice firm. "I won't be your puppet any longer." The witches' eyes blazed with anger, and they raised their hands to cast a spell to subdue me. But before they could utter a word, a blinding light erupted from within me, a light born of my love for Hollow's Rest and the strength of my will. The light consumed the witches, their forms disintegrating into swirling smoke and shadows. With a final, echoing scream, they were banished from the realm they had inhabited for centuries, sent back to whatever dark corner of the universe they had come from. I collapsed to the ground, exhausted but victorious. The town of Hollow's Rest was safe once more, and the witches' reign of terror had come to an end. In the days that followed, the town began to heal, and the whispers of the witches became nothing more than distant memories. Hollow's Rest returned to its peaceful, quiet existence, but I knew that the town's history would forever be marked by the dark chapter of the witches' revenge. I had been their instrument, their vessel, but in the end it was my love for the town and my own inner strength that had saved us all. Hollow's Rest would never be the same, but it would endure, as would the legend of the witches who sought revenge from the shadows.